Hello, dear. I'm Grandma Ruth, and I have to tell you something that happens to me at nearly every family gathering, every church potluck, every time I so much as mention one of my old kitchen tricks in front of somebody new. They laugh. Not a mean laugh, mind you, more of a polite little chuckle, the kind that says, "Oh, isn't that sweet? Grandma thinks that actually works." My own son-in-law rolled his eyes at me just last Thanksgiving when I told him what I was about to do with the turkey broth. And then he watched me do it, and he hasn't rolled his eyes at me since. It happened again just last month at a neighbor's baby shower. 3 different women standing around my kitchen shaking their heads while I did something with a banana peel I'll get to in a bit, and every single one of them asked me for the trick again before they left that afternoon. So today I want to walk you through a whole collection of these tricks, the ones nobody ever believes the first time I tell them, and show you exactly why they work every single time, whether folks believe it or not. Some of these came from my own grandmother, some I picked up from neighbors over the years, and a couple I stumbled onto myself out of pure stubbornness after refusing to throw something away. By the time we're through, I expect you'll be the one doing the convincing at your own table. The first one nearly always gets a laugh, and it's this. If you're boiling a pot of something on the stove, pasta, potatoes, a big pot of beans, and you're worried about it bubbling right up over the rim and making a mess of your stovetop, lay a plain wooden spoon straight across the top of the pot. Just balance it right there over the rim. Folks look at me like I've completely lost my senses when I tell them this, since a wooden spoon doesn't seem like it could do a thing against a rolling boil. But here's what's actually happening. Water on its own will boil right up and over the moment those big bubbles rise to the surface too fast for the air to escape properly, but wood doesn't hold heat and doesn't let the froth build the same way metal does. The moment those foaming bubbles touch that dry wooden spoon, they lose their structure and pop right back down into the pot instead of climbing higher and spilling over. I've had this spoon sitting across my pasta pot for more years than I can count, and I have not scrubbed a boiled-over stovetop since. My daughter watched me do it once, sure it was nonsense, and then watched her own pot boil clean over the very next week when she forgot to grab a spoon of her own. And she called me that same evening, half laughing at herself, asking me to walk her through it all over again. I keep a plain wooden spoon set aside just for this purpose now. Nothing fancy, worn smooth from years of use. And I reach for it the moment any pot on my stove starts climbing toward a rolling boil. Here's another one that gets me laughed at nearly every time. If you're about to pour boiling water into a glass, maybe for tea, maybe to warm it up before company arrives, set a plain metal spoon down inside the glass first before you pour. Folks always ask me why in the world I'd want a hot spoon sitting in my tea before I've even poured the water, and the answer has nothing to do with the tea and everything to do with the glass itself. A sudden rush of very hot liquid against cold glass causes the inside of that glass to expand a good deal faster than the outside can keep up with. And that uneven strain is exactly what cracks a glass right down the middle, sometimes so quick you barely see it happen. Metal conducts, heat away fast, so that spoon pulls some of that sudden heat off to the side as you pour, giving the glass a gentler introduction to the hot water instead of a shock all at once. I lost a good crystal glass to a crack years ago before my own mother taught me this trick. Right down the side, in one clean line, the moment the hot water hit it, and I haven't lost one since. It works just as well with a plain kitchen glass as it does with the fancier ones. you only bring out for company, and I've come to do it so automatically now that I hardly think twice before dropping that spoon in first. Now, boiling eggs, everybody's got an opinion on how to do this properly. Everyone swears their own grandmother's method is the one true way. But here's the one nobody ever believes until they try it themselves. Add a good spoonful of salt to the water before you drop your eggs in. Folks assume this is just for flavor, seasoning the shell somehow, which doesn't even make a lick of sense once you think it through, since the shell doesn't soak up salt from water. What the salt actually does is raise the boiling point of the water just slightly, and it helps firm up the egg white a touch faster if a shell happens to crack partway through cooking. So instead of watching your egg white stream out into the pot in ragged little clouds, it sets almost immediately and seals the crack shut on its own. It also happens to make the shells noticeably easier to peel once the eggs are done, since that salty water works its way ever so slightly between the shell and the membrane underneath. My grandmother swore by a good tablespoon in a full pot, and I've never once gone back to plain water since she showed me. I've had folks tell me they tried this once with just a pinch of salt and didn't notice a bit of difference, and I always tell them the same thing. A pinch won't do a thing for you. You need a proper tablespoon in a full pot of water for it to make any real difference at all. If you fry up bacon in your kitchen with any regularity, you'll know there's always that leftover grease sitting in the pan when you're done, tempting you to just pour it straight down the drain, which I'd urge you never to do, since it hardens right up inside your pipes and causes no end of trouble down the line. Here's a trick that gets doubted every time I mention it instead. Pour that warm bacon grease through a coffee filter set inside a small jar. Folks assume a paper coffee filter is far too flimsy to hold back all those little burnt bits and crumbs floating around in hot grease, and they're certain it'll tear right through or clog up solid before you've poured more than a spoonful. But a coffee filter is made exactly for straining out fine particles from a liquid. That's the whole purpose of the thing. And it does the very same job here that it does with your morning coffee grounds. What comes through into the jar is clean, clear, golden grease with nothing but flavor left behind, ready to use next time you're frying up potatoes or seasoning a cast iron pan. None of those burnt little flecks that would otherwise turn bitter the next time you heat it up. I keep a small jar of this strained grease sitting right beside my stove at all times, topped off every time I fry a fresh batch of bacon, and there's hardly a vegetable in my garden that doesn't taste better cooked in a spoonful of it. And here's another one that always gets me a raised eyebrow before I even finish explaining it, and it's saved more than one pickle jar in my house from getting hurled straight into the sink in frustration, my husband muttering under his breath the whole while he wrestled with it. If a jar lid is stuck fast and won't budge no matter how hard you twist, run the metal lid, just the lid, under a stream of hot water from the tap for about 30 seconds, keeping the rest of the jar dry. Folks assume hot water on a stuck lid must be some kind of old wives' tale about loosening things up in a general sort of way, but there's real reasoning behind it. Metal expands when it heats up a good deal faster than glass does, so that ring of metal around the rim of the jar actually grows just slightly larger than the glass threads underneath it, loosening its own grip without you having to strain a single muscle in your hand. By the time that 30 seconds is up, the lid will very often twist right off with hardly any effort at all. And if it doesn't budge quite yet, a dry dish towel for extra grip finishes the job nearly every time. I've used this one plenty of times on stubborn pickle jars that had my husband red in the face trying to muscle them open, and there's a real satisfaction in handing that jar back to him already loosened without breaking a sweat. Brown sugar is another one folks never believe until they've seen it with their own eyes. If your brown sugar has gone hard as a brick sitting in the pantry, drop a single slice of plain white sandwich bread right into the bag or the container, seal it up, and leave it overnight. By morning, that sugar will have softened right back up, scoopable and soft, just like the day you bought it, and you can simply pull the dried out bread slice back out and toss it away. The reasoning is nothing more complicated than moisture moving from a wetter place to a drier one, the same way it always does. That slice of bread has more moisture in it than the hardened sugar does. So, overnight, sealed up together in that container, the sugar slowly draws some of that moisture out of the bread and softens right back up on its own. No kneading, no hammering at it with a spoon, no fighting with a rock-hard block of sugar. The morning you need it for a batch of cookies, a slice of apple works just as well if you happen to be out of bread. Though I find the bread a good deal less trouble to fish back out and toss away once its job is done. Here's another one that gets me a doubtful look nearly every time I mention it, and it has to do with salt clumping up in humid weather until your shaker won't pour a single grain no matter how hard you shake it over the stove. Drop a small handful of plain dry rice right down into the salt container or the shaker itself and leave it be. Folks assume the rice must somehow be flavoring the salt, or worse, that I'm just filling up space in the jar for no good reason at all. But rice is remarkably good at pulling moisture out of the air around it, and it does exactly that inside your salt container too, drawing dampness away from the salt itself before it ever has the chance to clump together into those stubborn little lumps. I've kept a spoonful of rice sitting in the bottom of my salt shaker for years now, and I have not once had to bang it against the counter or dig out a clump with a fork the way I used to before I learned this trick. Now, here's the trick nobody believes until they've made scrambled eggs, my way at least once. Add a small pinch of baking soda, no more than a quarter teaspoon for a batch of 4 or 5 eggs, right into the bowl along with your eggs and a splash of milk before you whisk them together. Folks are certain baking soda belongs nowhere near a breakfast plate, that it must leave some strange, bitter taste behind or turn the eggs an odd color, but used in such a small amount, you won't taste a thing. What that little pinch does instead is react gently with the acidity already present in the eggs, releasing tiny bubbles as the mixture cooks. And those bubbles are exactly what give you that soft, airy, restaurant-style fluff instead of the flatter, denser scramble most folks are used to making at home. My daughter-in-law thought I'd finally gone too far with this one the first time she watched me do it, right up until she tasted the eggs herself, and now she won't make scrambled eggs any other way. One more before we get to the very last trick of the day, and this is the one that gets me the most disbelieving stares of the whole bunch. If you've got an old knife or a cast iron pan that's picked up a spot or two of rust, cut a raw potato in half, dip the cut side into a bit of dish soap or a sprinkle of baking soda, and rub it directly against the rusty spot in small circles. Folks look at me like I've truly gone round the bend when I tell them a vegetable can lift rust off metal, since rust seems like the kind of thing that ought to need a proper chemical cleaner and a good deal of elbow grease. But there's a mild acid naturally present in a raw potato, oxalic acid, and that acid works to break down the rust just enough that it lifts away from the metal with a bit of gentle rubbing, especially with the dish soap or baking soda helping to scrub the loosened rust free as you go. Rinse the spot well and dry it thoroughly afterward, since any lingering moisture will only invite the rust right back before you've even had a chance to admire your work, and you'll find the metal underneath looking a good deal better than it has in years. I've rescued more than one old knife of my grandfather's this way, blades that my husband was ready to throw out entirely, insisting they were beyond saving. If you've ever tried slicing through a soft gooey cake, a cheesecake, or a stack of cinnamon rolls with a knife, you know the mess that can make, the blade dragging and squashing everything instead of cutting clean. Here's the trick. Nobody believes until they see it done right in front of them. Take a length of plain unflavored dental floss, hold it taut between both hands, and pull it straight down through whatever you're slicing, just like you'd use a wire cheese cutter. It sounds almost too simple to actually work, and folks assume I'm pulling their leg the first time I mention it, picturing floss as something that belongs strictly in the bathroom cabinet and nowhere near a dessert plate, but that thin strand of floss slices clean through soft, sticky things without dragging or squashing the way a wide metal blade will, since there's so little surface area touching the food as it passes through. I use this for cheesecake at every single holiday now, and the slices come out so neat and even, you'd think I'd hired somebody to cut them. It works just as well on a soft log of goat cheese or a stack of unbaked cinnamon rolls before you separate them for the pan, and I've taught nearly every one of my grandchildren this same trick the moment they were old enough to be trusted near a birthday cake. Tarnished silverware is a job most folks dread, scrubbing away with a special polish that smells sharp and leaves your hands feeling raw and stinging long after you've set the cloth down. Here's the one that gets the biggest laugh of the whole bunch. Rub the inside of a banana peel directly against tarnished silver, then buff it with a soft cloth. Folks are certain I'm making this one up entirely, since a banana peel seems like the last thing that belongs anywhere near your good silverware. But that peel is rich in certain minerals that work gently against tarnish, lifting the dullness without scratching the metal the way some harsher polishes can, and it leaves behind a soft shine once you've buffed it clean with the cloth. It won't outshine a proper commercial polish on silver that's badly blackened, mind you, but for regular upkeep on pieces you use often, it does a surprisingly fine job for something that would otherwise go straight into your compost bin. This is the very trick that had those 3 women at the baby shower shaking their heads at me, right up until I handed one of them a dull little spoon and let her try it herself. And she went quiet awfully fast once she saw the shine come up under her own 2 hands. Stale bread is another one folks give up on entirely, tossing out a loaf the moment it's gone, the least bit dry and firm, when really it just needs a bit of coaxing back to life rather than a trip straight to the trash bin. Instead, wrap that stale bread, or even just a stale roll, in a slightly damp paper towel and warm it in the microwave for about 10 to 15 seconds. Open it up and you'll find bread that's soft again, nearly as good as the day it was baked, at least for that one meal. The dry bread pulls in the moisture from that damp towel as it heats, and the quick blast of warmth softens the crumb right back up before it has any chance to dry back out again. It won't bring a loaf back from true staleness day after day, but for a dinner roll that's gone a bit firm sitting on the counter, it's saved me from wasting good bread more times than I can count. I do the very same thing with a stale slice of cornbread on a Sunday afternoon when I'm not in the mood. to bake a fresh pan, and nobody at my table has ever once guessed it wasn't fresh out of the oven that morning. If you've got a bit of leftover wine at the bottom of the bottle after a dinner party, or a bit of leftover coffee sitting cold in the pot the next morning, don't you dare pour it down the drain. Pour it instead into an ice cube tray and freeze it solid, and you'll thank yourself the very next time a recipe calls for just a splash of either one. Folks always assume frozen wine or frozen coffee must turn to some strange, useless block once it thaws, good for nothing at all. But those little cubes are perfect for cooking. Drop a wine cube straight into a simmering sauce or a pot of stew whenever a recipe calls for a splash of wine. And drop a coffee cube into a glass of iced coffee on a hot afternoon, so you're not watering down the flavor the way a plain ice cube always will. I keep a little bag of these cubes tucked in the back of my freezer at all times. And I've never once had to buy a fresh bottle of cooking wine just for a splash in a sauce. It works every bit as well with leftover buttermilk or a bit of leftover broth too. And between the three, my freezer door has turned into a fair little pantry of its own, ready for whatever a recipe happens to call for that particular evening. And here's one last trick that gets doubted every single time, right up until somebody tries it themselves. And it's come in handy for me more times than nearly any other trick on this whole list. If you've got a hard, unripe avocado or tomato sitting on your counter and you need it ready to eat in a hurry, maybe company's coming for supper and you only just realized the avocados aren't ready, close it up inside a plain brown paper bag along with a ripe banana and fold the top over. Leave it sitting on the counter overnight. Sometimes just an afternoon is enough. Folks are certain that closing fruit up in a paper bag can't possibly speed anything along. But ripening fruit gives off a natural gas, and that banana in particular gives off quite a lot of it. Trapped inside that closed bag instead of drifting away into the open air of your kitchen, that gas builds up around the fruit and pushes the ripening along a good deal faster than it would happen sitting out in the open. I've turned a rock-hard avocado into a perfectly soft one in under a day this way more times than I can say, right when I needed it for supper that very evening. And if you want to speed things along even faster, tuck an apple in there alongside the banana instead, since apples give off a good bit of that same ripening gas too. And between the two of them, even the most stubborn green tomato will come around a good deal quicker than it would sitting out on the windowsill on its own. So there you have it, a whole collection of the tricks that get me laughed at, doubted, and eye-rolled at more than nearly anything else I share. And every single one of them has earned its place in my kitchen through years of actually working, not once, not twice, but every time I've reached for it. My own grandmother used to say that the tricks folks doubt the loudest are usually the very ones worth holding on to, since anybody can believe something that sounds sensible right off the bat. But it takes a bit more than that to keep using a trick year after year once you know for certain it holds up. There's a real satisfaction, too, in proving somebody wrong in the gentlest possible way, not with an argument, but with a wooden spoon balanced across a boiling pot, or a shine slowly coming up on a dull spoon under a strip of banana peel, right there in front of their own two eyes. I've watched more than a few skeptics go quiet that way over the years, and there's nothing quite like it. I'd love to hear which one of these surprised you the most, or whether you've got a trick of your own that nobody in your family believes either. So tell me all about it down in the comments, and don't be shy about it, since I suspect half the folks reading along have got a trick or two tucked away that their own children still roll their eyes at. And if you try one of these out this week and it works just the way I said it would, come back and tell me so. Because there's nothing I enjoy quite so much as hearing that another skeptic has been won over, one wooden spoon or one banana peel at a time. I'm Grandma Ruth. Thank you for listening to Grandma Knows Best.